Hi, I'm Joe Payne, born and raised Santa Maria, California. I'm a musician. I do a lot of things. I'm a musician, I'm a piano tuner. I am a journalist. I am studying history academically right now at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. People in town might recognize me. I used to play piano at the mall for years. I volunteer, I give the pre-concert lecture for the Santa Maria Philharmonic Society. So played in multiple bands over the years in high school and after that. But I also play guitar, mandolin, ukulele if the right person asks me. And so I just love music, but it all started with the piano. My education began with Patricia Boyd, Patty Boyd. You might have heard of her in Santa Maria. You could basically throw a rock in this town and hit one of her students. She's passed on, but she had dwarfism. And so, meeting her at a very early age, at 7 years old, I remember my dad kind of getting down on one knee and having a talk with me, like, listen, you're going to go to your teacher's house. And, he explained to me that she had dwarfism. And he said, and, he put his kind of finger in my face, serious moment, and you treat her with the respect you treat me and your grandmother, because she is, an old lady and she's your elder and you show her that respect. And, and so that was a very formative experience. She didn't have the stereotypical ruler, that people have horror stories about. She had a baton and she was very good at guiding your hand and your wrist, having a light wrist and a wrist with lots of movement and holding your hands forward, keeping your fingers curved. The posture was a very important thing for her. And I feel like it gave me my chops. Not even warmed up, man. I like kind of that bluesy stuff. You were doing minor stuff there a minute ago, right? Cut, man. Well, I was studying privately with Larry Keast. If anybody knows him in Santa Maria, he's tuned since before here in the Valley, I think since before I was born. But he also worked at Hancock for a time as a teacher for one of their piano classes that I took. And then I was studying with him privately, trying to get my classical chops up. He's very good at teaching that. And I knew he was a piano tuner. And he's just a genius. He has like a harpsichord he built himself. He has a replica of a Mozart era piano that he built himself, and so I just knew this guy was quite a well of information. And so basically I must have been 24 or 20 something. And our private piano lessons turned to piano tuning lessons. And then over the years, I've picked up some of the technician stuff. Not a ton of it. It's not like I'm the best around or the best there ever was. Same thing for me as a piano player because I have so many interests. But I do a lot of different things. But the thing we focused on straight on first was tuning, how to tune correctly, how to set the pins so that it will stay in tune longer, or won't go out of tune as soon as you play a few notes. There's an art to it, and it's definitely a craft as well, kind of like music. It can be an art and a craft. It was just, it really was just something. I had the time and the money, and I just, thought this would be a good thing for me to learn how to do because hardly anybody our age does it. And that's usually people remark when I go to tune their pianos. Oh my goodness, you're so young, Yes, yeah, I was, I don't remember the fall of the wall, you know what I mean? I'm a 90s kid, so. It's just taking something I was already really interested in, adding some more technical knowledge to it. And, it is labor and it's very particular and, fine motor skills and stuff like that. But, I'm sure the first piano tunings I did weren't the best by any degree, but you just do more and you do more and you do more, and it takes a little less long each time, and you get better at it. And people keep calling me back, so I must be doing something right. Larry taught me by ear at first, and he was doing, showing me, tuning a fifth, and listening to the overtones between that fifth and tuning that way, and explaining, how your fifths have to be slightly flat and your fourths have to be slightly sharp. Trying to remember the technical terms he used for that, but fifths are contracted, fourths are expanded in equal temperament tuning. So I learned by ear. I use a very sophisticated electronic aid now for part of the tuning, not the whole thing, because I'm tuning a lot by ear. And it takes time to develop your ear. Perfect pitch isn't like really real, isn't a thing that really exists, but people have what's called pitch memory. It's almost like people have photographic memory. They can remember, what pitches sound like. And so, but even then that's something that you might have a proclivity for, but that you develop and you practice and you work on your whole life, especially, a lot of people who claim to have perfect pitch are musicians, of course. So they've learned it that way. So, but there are some controversial tuning things like 432 hertz and other things like that I don't want to offend anybody, but, I've only tuned a piano once to 432 hertz and I didn't like it. But that's a whole other can of worms, I think. Yeah, people ask how often should I have my piano tuned, and the standard answer that tuners like myself gives is like a year, basically around a year. I always tell people if you play a lot, if you're a teacher, it's a working piano, then you probably want to go every 6 months, between 6 months and a year. But really the best answer, and the piano tuner will tell you, of course, they have a vested interest in it, is that whenever you notice your piano's bothering you, it sounds out of tune, get it tuned. Pianos go out of tune gradually over time, and they can tend to sink in pitch, and you might not notice it right away, or you might not notice it over several years. Maybe you don't play a lot because, whatever, you play around the holidays, and it's not until years and years later that enough of the notes bother a regular person enough that they call. By that time, your piano is sunk down in pitch quite a bit. So, if you want it, if you're a perfectionist and you want it right at a 440 hertz, then, you want to make sure you keep it maintained. And that's the thing, a healthy piano will stay in tune, so that if you have a tuner come regularly, your tunings will be much more stable. If you wait a long time, your piano goes way flat. A lot of the strings are way out of whack. It's just more tension and movement on the body and the harp of your instrument when you do get it tuned. So it's going to be a less stable tuning, because it's not going to, it's like, the best tuners have the most economy of movement on how much tension they're applying to your strings. They're moving the strings the least amount possible when they tune your piano, so that it will be stable and remain stable and in tune. Let me see. I really like old jazz. So if somebody asks me to play, a standard, this is one of my go-tos. So. People don't like to hear it, and then you know, you want to be sensitive to clients, but at the same time, you got to be honest. You know, you're my as a businessman, you want to be honest with your clients. Not all pianos are created equal, unfortunately. I used to say I love all pianos, just with it. You know, you could love a cheap, junky old piano, but they're just not going to play the same. You know, every era of pianos had their bargain pianos and their middle, their working class, but upper end pianos, and then they have the Steinways and the Busendorfers and the creme de la creme, the top instruments. The older a piano gets, it's just going to develop more problems. If you have a really well, solidly built piano, that's 100 years old, and it's never been refurbished or never been restrung, it needs to be refurbished. It needs to be restrung. Even if it's a fine, piano, if it's 100 years old, it's 100 years old. I've tuned pianos from the 1880s. Not fun to tune. You could pound your head into the keys, hours and 5-hour tuning, and it still doesn't sound like you think it should, but that's no fault of the tuner. It's just an old instrument. After a certain point, these are just antiques, and they're worth what they're worth as furniture. That's another thing you don't want to have to tell people is, they want to ask you, what's my piano worth? And you have to be like, whatever you can get for it, because you watch people post something on Craigslist and, $3,000. A few weeks it's $2,000. A few weeks it's $1,200. And then, a month after that, it's please just come take it. We need to move and we need to leave. Just take it. That'd be a good 13, man. That's fun. That's the thing. That's a chord I like to test a tune piano with. Me, I would love a Steinway. But if somebody offered me a 100-year-old Steinway, depending on the condition, and a new or 5-year-old Yamaha Grand, I might just take the Yamaha because it's going to be less work and. But I'm a piano tuner, so I have no excuse, but my piano doesn't sound great. I still have my Baldwin Acrosonic little spin it upright. That was my dad's growing up. I have that at home, and the thing's out of tune, needs some adjustments here and there, and I don't give it the attention it deserves, but at the end of the day as well, I don't have a grand at home, and I need one because there's a lot of repertoire that I would try to play on my Spinet, and it just ain't gonna sound right, but it ain't gonna play right either. Because you've compromised the length of the key and the lever and all these other things. It doesn't have the type of response that this grand piano might. It doesn't matter the age, it's just, there's more room in a grand piano for all of that kind of stuff. So, it depends. Generally speaking, grands, better than uprights, but there are fine uprights that I'd be happy to own and play, and they've, going to fit better in the condo than a big grand piano, so it really is, I'll play any piano anywhere I see, it's like all cats across the world, they're my friends, they're every cat, and if I see, there could be the greasiest flea-bitten alley cat, I'm still gonna, hey, boom, come here, any piano I see, I'm gonna try to play it, and that's a good time to throw your card in there if it's got problems, but I just love pianos. I love playing piano, I love hearing piano, and so I got into the business kind of for selfish reasons. I want to play all the pianos, and I want them to sound good if I'm going to play them. So, if you've ever gone to play and maybe a piano, maybe there's one or two notes that are just so sour and so bad, or the key sticks or whatever it might be, it's really nice to be able to open up the lid, look under the hood, so to speak, and take care of it. And that's part of what got me into it. It was my own interest in piano, but then also kind of the self-interest of it. It would be nice if my piano sounded good, and I didn't have to pay someone else to tune it. So sometimes I'll just want to sit down and improvise. Sometimes I'll have something in my head. Like, wouldn't it be fun to do a ragtime version of the Star Wars? Right? Let me try that again, right? So in that case, I have to sit down and make an arrangement and think about how I want to do it. Other times I just want to sit down and I just like to, like you talked about tone poems, like just making something nice for myself. I also I basically have like a little Randy Newman living on my shoulder everywhere I go. So I'm always like in danger of just kind of, that just is the style. I don't know, I just like that kind of, that kind of old-timey jazzy feel. There's so much jazz, to really listen to and get into. But for me, it's it goes back to Oscar Peterson, Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, that kind of classic jazz era. I've tried to learn a little Oscar Peterson style, and it's so hard. He's probably the pinnacle for me, the greatest of the great. But something like his Gravy Waltz, which uses a lot of bass, right hand and left hand. There, but I didn't like how I ended it. This is a big thing though, if I want to demystify music for everybody really quick, it's pattern recognition. At the end of the day, you're doing pattern recognition. I mean, theoretically, if I know a blues is a 1-4-5, eventually I stop thinking about, now I'm going to the 4 chord, now I'm going to the 5, because I've done it so many times, that it becomes, it's like a duck's feet. It's under the water, but it's doing a lot of work. It's your operating system. So that's why I do like theory. Is there are these shapes, that I might go towards, right, or right. You get those weird woo, that's a, or I call them crunchy chords, kind of. But if you know where to resolve it, or right, and then if you know how chords collapse into each other, and again this comes from the scale, you can really just kind of go on forever. For me, it's that's how I remember things from memory. Is I have a roadmap in my head, and I know the verse and the chorus, and this is the chord progression for the verse, this is the chord progression for the chorus, and I hope I have my melody, I remember correctly and all of that. So, but then again, even when you study from a score to perform, you want to get off book, and that's where the magic happens, where you stop thinking about the theory, and you have these shapes and these patterns under your fingers, and so they come out more naturally, and that's what practice, when I talk about the different kinds, that's what practice is about. It's to really just force yourself into the muscle memory, so you can, you feel it. You have to feel it in your bones, in your muscles, and then you've done all this practice. That's laying a foundation, and then you build up from there, and then it could be only during a performance, where you have the adrenaline rush and all the stuff of a performance and stage fright and all that, if you're not practiced, mistakes will happen. If you're well practiced, magic will happen because you've done all that work. And that's something I've performed for so long now that I don't really get stage fright anymore unless it's like a high stakes important situation. But that I still get the adrenaline rush, but I don't categorize it as stage fright anymore because once you perform enough, you get to a point where you realize it's just a biological response to people having their attention on you, you being aware of their attention on you. But you can really ride the wave, use all these endogenous neurotransmitters that are cascading through your brain. That's where you have those moments where it's like you're looking down at yourself playing the piano so the flow state or whatever, the elusive flow state. But, for me, even if I'm have to think about it, if I'm having fun, I'm still having fun. I don't have to feel the magic lightning bolt or the muse or whatever you might call it. I really love, I messed it up already, but I like to play classical. But the way I was taught, the way Larry taught me to learn it is very much to study it almost like a Shakespearean actor would study the book. You have to get off book after a certain point. And you have to start making it mean something to you away from the music. You can't just be sitting there reading it. If I go to study a piece of classical like that, it takes time, it takes work. To be able to do this. To do that, you have to sit there and go. Nobody pays to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. That's practice. That's the work. To me, that's what it means to be a musician, is you have to be conversant in music. You have to be able to converse, be able to play some music. You could be a musician who never performs for everybody. That's fine. But to me, one of the marks of a musician is someone who studies the art or the craft, right? Doesn't mean they have to read. It doesn't mean they have to have a theory brain, but they've studied their instrument. They've tried to learn how to play it. My father-in-law, who's since passed, he's a great musician and songwriter. I say, "What key is it in, Robert?" He go, "This one." Start playing. Rehearsal is when a performance is coming. You're ready for a performance. But even then, rehearsal still, you might get your whole band together and there might even be people listening. It's still not a performance. You still are talking technique. You're talking, how many bars before we do this? Or are you going to stomp on my solo again? Or do you want to do some call and response, et cetera? For me, as a solo person, rehearsing would be like I'm sitting at home and I'm playing as if it's a performance. But then I'm also, taking note of where I need work or what I could work on. And then there's performance. And that really could change as soon as there's a person, right? So I could be sitting there practicing my piano, doing the hand exercises, and then someone knocks on the door and I let them in. Well, if they go, don't let me disturb you, well, it's a performance now. I'm gonna perform. Because that's how I see it. So, it's very I don't like to be an elitist. Like I said, I don't think you have to be reading music or have all this theoretical knowledge. I love all that stuff. There are plenty of musicians, who are totally conversant, but maybe they're technically illiterate as far as reading music. Doesn't matter. They can play just fine, right? So, there's multiple levels to it. But yeah, I get annoyed when music is, music doesn't belong to any. It doesn't belong to academia. It belongs to everybody. I love folk music, and folk music is like, it could be somebody in their backyard with a jug and a mop, handle and a big long piece of string, or it could be you hitting your, slapping your hands or whistling as you go down the street. Music is music. And to me, it's a human universal. I study history. I'm very interested in anthropology. Everybody has music. Everybody has dance. Everybody has singing. And that's another thing is kind of as an instrumentalist, I was raised with that school of you're playing melodies, you're trying to elicit the human voice. Even though you have all these notes that are just one note, and piano notes don't warble, they don't bend, but that's why Chopin could do something like, right? And you hear the, right? You can hear the melody. He's doing a stylized like singing with the piano, and so that's some of my thoughts on it. But I'll again, I don't like the elitism. People might think I'm an elitist as a musician. I'll play with anybody. You got to know, you got to be able to play, of course. And that's the one thing. It's kind of like, not what I would know anything about it, but it's like martial arts or something. Like, you'll find out on the mat whether you can do it or not. There's a really good book I recommend by Daniel J. Levitin called "This Is Your Brain on Music," and it just talks about all these different aspects of how we hear music, how we interpret it, how our brain, it cascades across our brain and all these different cortices of our brain at the same time. Basically anthropologists and neuroanthropologists wonder, like, why do we have music? There's no point to it. There might be some survival or Darwinian thing where, whoever sang the best got the had more offspring or whatever. But there's also just the idea that it's totally superfluous. It's totally extra. It's unnecessary. But it's totally vital. Every human, group that's ever been contacted or observed has music and singing of some kind. So it's, and I just think it is one way that we as humans try to map our the emotional landscape that lives inside of all of us. I grew up where, like, the one of the big bands among me and my friends was Bright Eyes and Conor Oberst and that kind of emo, which is just short for emotive sound. But I mean, that's like the blues, the blues as an American idiom of music, the blues is associated with being sad or having the blues, and it's not the music itself. It doesn't make sense to just reduce down blues music to that. But the idea that it's about expressing your emotions. You have a very simple chord structure, and then it's like, how do you, express yourself within that? So they're just things that can't be said with words, and this is part of why I've always struggled. I've tried to write songs, and my poetry is very like junior high level poetry, but to me, you can say so much more without any words at all, and that's what jazz is about. That's what the blues is about. That's what a guitar solo is about. I mean, I love stuff like that. I'm a nerd for when you have a musical theme tied to an idea. You know what I mean? That's a tradition that comes out of opera. You could have a melody that's tied to a specific idea. I'm a big Lord of the Rings nerd. Right. That's the ring. You hear that and you're supposed to think of the ring. When you hear... That's the fellowship. That's when they all come together. And my axe, and then we're gonna do it, right? That's their theme. The hobbits have their little how's it go? Right, the little pan flute. Right, that's not too great, but you get it. It's very pastoral. It's very, so. You can create this tonal world. You can create this tonal landscape. And it's just fun. Like, what is a musician being funny with you? Are they messing with your head? Are they, You know, are they being, can you hear humor in music? Can you hear pain? Can you hear anguish? Can you hear confusion? Can you hear, you know, someone who's a little drunk, someone who's, or is, you know, in a conflict? Like all that stuff can be heard in music. And there's a great tradition of depicting those things. Like the old movie scores, the old silent movies where the piano player would have to play the chase scene and play the, you know, whatever the, you know, the moment the two fall in love at first sight or whatever. But, you know, imagine a world without music. Imagine your favorite film without the score. Imagine your school dance without, imagine your wedding without your couple's song. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a very important part of all of our lives. My grandmother, on my dad's side, my Scottish grandmother, I mentioned my dad plays bagpipes. She got dementia and she had Alzheimer's when she passed for several years, and it got progressively worse. It's a terrible disease, and there's no cure. But I wish I'd known at the time that it's quite manageable with a non-pharmaceutical intervention, and it's music. You can play someone with dementia or Alzheimer's music from their youth, music that played as they were growing up, stuff that was top of the chart when they were graduating high school, or like I said, played at the school dance or at their wedding, and they will actually get relief. It will actually, because we have so many connections in our brain, you know, when we hear music, it's able to circumvent the plaques that build up in your brain from Alzheimer's. I wish I'd known that. If I'd known I could have played my grandma some big band jazz or Django Reinhardt or whatever, and that she loved when she was young, you know, surviving the Blitz or whatever in Scotland, then you know, I could have given her some relief, you know, because she was in a terrible way, you know, because a victim of her biology just had lost in her mind, you know, and thinking about that you could literally cast light into the dark with just collections of tones. You know, our brain essentially perceives it as almost like a spatial object. Like we're hearing low notes, we're hearing high notes, we're hearing a floor and a ceiling, and it wavers up and down. You know, you look at a recording on the computer, you can see the waveforms and all that. But our brain is, you know, and our brain knows you could even if you don't have the cultural context. They've done neuro studies where they play people, you know, a little bit of right, and then you play them a little, you know, what's another, you know, and then you could go play some Chopin, right? Some. Play these different eras of music, and the human brain will understand that those two aren't the same guy. Those first two might have been the same guy, but that third one, they're not the same person, right? You know, you can, and again, every song has a shape. This is not the same as, right? They're just not the same, and we know it immediately. You can't, you know, and I'd love to mess with my students, especially the kids, and say, what's this song? Just like, you know, but they laugh and they smile because they know what it is. I've just taken Twinkle Twinkle and put it in a minor key, you know. So you know, there's all these things that we do. You can defy people's expectations. It's like setting up a good joke. You have a good setup, and then you have the punchline, you know. And I'm all about that. I'm a sucker for a secondary dominant. You know? Right, just 2-5-1, man. That's jazz. 2-5-1's all you need, right? Three chords in blues, and it could be 3 in jazz. Of course, add that fourth one in, then you're good, right? And then those chords, I like leaving people with a big question mark at the end of a song, you know what I mean? Like instead of, right, is you kind of, that kind of, where does it go? I like that kind of stuff. Defying expectations. I have a musician friend, another Joe, who once told me, he said, I want to challenge my listeners' expectations. I want to challenge them. Some musicians are like that. Some of them do want to make you just feel warm and fuzzy, and that's cool too. But me, I just like to have fun and be inventive, and what can I come up with, or what's he going to do next? I like to play like that. Dissonance is something, it's almost like, like I like fermented foods like kimchi, or there's a saying in Japan that basically means that the young people, they can't take their bitters. Like he can't take his bitters, meaning bitter food that you're supposed to learn to develop a taste for when you're young, or it's just things that you wouldn't otherwise, gross, but your parents feed it to you enough times and you develop the taste for it. And so, dissonance. I remember my dad's a musician, so I grew up, with a father musician, having music in the house. He played guitar, piano. He's a bagpipe player, so he's a professional piper. My grandmother was from Scotland, so I grew up, with different kinds of musics in the house. But I remember him telling me once about the Thelonious Monk. He just goes, "Oh, he's unlistenable. He's so dissonant," And I'm like, dude, first of all, you're playing bagpipes. No offense. But, people respond differently to dissonance. I really like Gillian Welch, and I always forget his first name, but the guy who plays guitar with her, Rollins. Amazing guitar player, incredible. And I remember hearing him in an interview once where people were commenting on one of their recordings that, why are the guitars so out of tune? Why are the guitars so out of tune? And he's like, no, I swear my guitar's in tune, but it might be because it's or it might be it might be something like this, or like a sharp 11, you know what I mean? There might be some kind of chord going on that's dissonant. I really like that 13 I was playing earlier, right? But then you can, make it even darker and gloomier, right? So and sometimes dissonance is fun because you can just play something that's, just be like really just kind of, I remember I had a jazz teacher named Ron Richards, who's from around here. And I remember he had this thing where he just took a tritone and he just moved it down chromatically. I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, this is the dominant motion. If you just keep it going, you can do all kinds of... It's the perfect thing for a blues. So that kind of, or McCoy Tyner. You can have I like harsh sounds. I mean, I don't know what it is. I like tritones, like when you hear you could be in the key of C, and you could play all diatonically, right? Where none of these notes are out of the scale, right? Right? Or you could be more dissonant. You could use more notes outside of the scale, to where you're... Right, where you're using all those kind of... And I think that's just because I grew up, like, again, Randy Newman. song is like tritones, and weird, right, weird harmonies like that, our ears hear them and go, but those are things I like. I like to hear, I like harsh sounds. I don't know, it's just part of the blues, but you hear that in jazz. Jazz can be very smooth, but it can also be very like dirty, or not dirty, but you know what I mean. Like, I guess sleazy is a good word for it. But there's a reason why jazz was, kind of, ooh, that's risque music. I don't want my kids listening to it. I love Ray Charles. I love Errol Gardner, like that kind of very expressive. And for me, that's what it's about. It's very expressive. You get that in classical music. I love Chopin. I love Bach and Mozart. And, you find somebody like Chopin doing, something like, you have that kind of, or what is it? See, I would have to play the whole thing, But you'll hear him do that kind of, oof. You can hear that very chromatic, but very sensuous and very, I don't know, there's lots of words I could use. I don't know. When I sit down at a piano, I could play anything, but I usually end up just kind of improvising some jazz, and because it just makes me happy. Like that's kind of a funny thing. I once heard Andras Schiff, the great classical pianist, say every morning he wakes up and he plays Bach because that's like taking a shower musically for him. I should probably do that. I should probably play Bach every morning. I don't play my Bach enough. I love Bach, but it is one of those things where playing, just improvising at the piano, it's like, I don't know, like stretching out in the morning or doing like a yoga session or something. Like it just kind of clears my mind, and it's a lot better than doing hand exercises or running scales all day. So